Hello, my name is Bill Child. I'm a philosopher at the University of Oxford, and these are my colleagues, Matt Williams, who is a politics academic, and Chris Bowdler, who's an economist. We're going to talk to you a bit about the structure of the PPE course, particularly with relation to the first year and then what happens after that in the second and third years. I'll talk about philosophy, Matt about politics, and Chris about economics. So here we go, about philosophy within PPE. The first year course in philosophy has three components: general philosophy, moral philosophy, and logic. And they're all compulsory, so you do a bit of each, probably one in each of the three terms of the year. So in general philosophy, you'd be studying questions like this. What's the difference between believing something and knowing that it's true? Or what makes you, the person who's reading these slides or watching this video in 2020, the same person as a particular girl or boy who was at primary school in 2010? I mean, is it that you, the person in 2020, remembers things that you were doing in 2010? Or is it that you're the same human body? Is it just that you've got the same brain? Does the idea of a brain transplant make sense? Could you be the same person with a different brain? So those sorts of general questions about the nature of reality and our knowledge of reality. The second component, moral philosophy, asks, for example, whether it's permissible to violate the rights of a small group of people in order to produce a greater benefit for society as a whole. Or a question like this: if your actions flow from your character and your upbringing, and you didn't get to choose those, can you ever be really responsible for what you do? So you might know that problem under the kind of heading of the problem of free will and responsibility. And in logic, which you probably, you won't have studied at school or college before, almost certainly, but it's the study in a kind of rigorous, systematic way of what makes arguments good arguments or bad arguments, and how we refer to things and talk about things using language. So, for example, the kind of question you might consider in logic is, why is the following argument a bad argument? If road traffic increases, then air pollution will get worse, but road traffic won't increase, therefore air pollution won't get worse. That's a kind of form of argument that you meet quite often in sort of public discourse, but it's a bad argument. The conclusion doesn't follow from the premises, and so it's interesting to try to work out why that's so. Or here's another issue you might meet in logic in the first year: is this sentence true or false, or neither true nor false? The sentence is, the present king of France is bald. Well, there is no present king of France. So does that mean that the sentence, the present king of France is bald, is false? It's certainly not true. But is it false, or is it neither true nor false? Does it have some kind of special status, or is it not a proper sentence at all? That's just to give you a brief idea about the sorts of things you'd be thinking about and studying in general philosophy, moral philosophy, and logic. But then beyond the first year, of course, within PPE at Oxford, you don't have to continue with all three subjects: philosophy, politics, economics, into the second and third year. But if you do go on with philosophy, this is how it works. Everyone takes two core subjects, or kind of central subjects in philosophy, in the first two terms of the second year. And those would be ethics, which are the kind of the same sorts of subjects about that you will have started thinking about in moral philosophy in the first year. And then one of the following subjects, which are kind of broadly a continuation of studying the sorts of topics that were introduced in general philosophy. So that would be a choice of early modern philosophy, writers like Descartes and Hume from the 17th and 18th centuries, or knowledge and reality, about our knowledge of the world and the nature of the world, or there's kind of a choice of two works in ancient Greek philosophy, Plato's book Republic, or Aristotle's work Nicomachean Ethics. So those would be your two core subjects. And beyond that, you can do 1, 2, or 3 further philosophy options from a great long list of possibilities, but which include, for example, philosophy of religion, questions about the existence of God, whether you could ever have evidence that would persuade you that a miracle had occurred, and so on. And practical ethics, which is kind of applied moral philosophy to real-world examples. Philosophy and feminism, or philosophy of science, or the philosophy of Wittgenstein, or who I mentioned as just one philosopher. There's a number of options that you could take that study in detail the works of a particular philosopher. So that's the way that the philosophy courses, the philosophy course within PPE operates in the first year and then over the second and third years. So I will stop sharing my screen and pass you over to Matt, who'll tell you something about the politics course here.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the website. So this is the PPE website. So in case you're interested in the contents of any of the courses, you can find lots of great information here. And then if you come down here, you'll find course structure. And there is a very useful guide, that student handbook. And you can, of course, go through the whole thing, but if you head towards an appendix, it'll give you some specific details as to the various options available for all of the subjects. So here we have philosophy, and I'm going to talk about politics. Now, before I talk about these options, these are second and third year options. I'll first of all talk about the first year. The first year, we don't assume any foreknowledge of political science, and so it is introductory, and the courses are very similar at each of the colleges. So what we do is we introduce you to the two core subdisciplines of political science, which are the practice of politics and the theory of politics. So if you like, that's how politics could or indeed should be organized versus how politics actually is in all its grubby reality. Political theory is very closely associated with philosophy. Indeed, it in many instances is a subdiscipline of philosophy. Political practice is more often associated, in fact, with economics. So you could argue that in some senses it's a subdiscipline of economics. But nonetheless, the two subjects interlink, but they are also separate in terms of their methods and their content. So we tend to introduce them to you completely distinctly in your first year. And you will have compulsory modules on the theory and practice of politics. I tend to teach the practice of politics, where we talk about, for example, how does the Netherlands organize its politics, and how might that have various costs and benefits relative to the way that Canada organizes its politics, or Ghana. So we try and look at the whole world and see how politics works. There's also a quantitative analysis component to the first year, where we introduce you to some mathematical methods in political science, which can be very useful, not only in producing your own analysis of politics, but also effectively critiquing other people's analyses as well. Then in the second year, you may choose to continue with politics. You have a choice at the end of your first year as to whether or not to continue with all three of philosophy, politics, and economics, or dropping one of the three. You can't drop two of the three. You have to take at least two to finals. Most people do that. Most people take two subjects all the way to finals. It's relatively unusual to take all three, but it's absolutely possible should you wish to. And if you choose to do politics as one of your three, you're then asked to take at least 2 core papers and 2 option papers. So you're expected to take 4 papers in total to finals, which you would sit at the end of your third year. Now, it is possible to have fewer or more option papers so that you can tilt the balance of your degree perhaps more or less towards politics. But those sorts of details can be dealt with more effectively on course. But let me just tell you what the core subjects are. So for politics, you would have to pick 2 from the following list of 5 options, which is comparative government, British politics and government since 1900, theory of politics, international relations, and political sociology. So those are the core papers of which you would be expected to pick 2, and your tutors will give you all the advice that you may wish in terms of making that decision, because the choices you can make with your core papers could implicate what sort of options might be appropriate for you as well. And with regard to further subjects or options, well, there's a lot to choose from. As you can see, some of them are more from the practical end of the spectrum with regard to how politics actually operate. So, for example, with modern British government and politics, or government in politics in the US. There's also other parts of the world, so former Soviet Union, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, South Asia, Middle East. There's more international relations oriented topics. So if you're really into IR, you can orient your degree in that direction. And there are lots more options you can do that are pertinent to political theory. So if, for example, you're a very keen philosopher and you intend to pursue master's level study of philosophy, you can absolutely do that with a PPE degree, because you can choose politics and philosophy and tilt your politics papers more towards the philosophical end. Ditto for whether you're interested in economics or indeed politics. So the degree is very flexible, lots of options, and many people, if not most people, end up with an entirely different PPE degree to everyone else in their cohort, which is one of the great strengths of the program. So that is pretty much everything from me. So I will now stop sharing and hand over to Chris.
Thanks, Matt. So I'll talk about the economics part of the degree over the 3 years. So in the first year, there is a compulsory economics course known as Introductory Economics, and there are 3 elements to this particular course. First of all, there's some work on microeconomics, which is the study of decision making at the individual level. So you'll look at how consumers might go about allocating a budget, how firms might go about deciding how much to produce, how firms and consumers then come together in market situations, think about whether or not those market outcomes are desirable, think about questions such as whether or not government should intervene to try to alter market outcomes. Secondly, there is some coverage of macroeconomics. So macroeconomics is about taking the tools of individual level decision making and aggregating those up to the level of the economy as a whole, and understanding or seeking to understand the determination of things such as total GDP, the level of employment versus unemployment, what determines the rate of price inflation, how exchange rates respond to economic developments, and so on. As part of that course, there's also some further analysis of economic policy making. So how should central banks set interest rates in response to economic conditions? How should governments take decisions over taxation levels and levels of government spending based upon where the economy is currently at? Thirdly, rather like the Q-STEP course that Matt described for politics, there is a short course in statistics and causal inference. So this introduces you to the methods that are needed for hypothesis testing and inference in social science and economics in particular. So, for example, if you wanted to examine whether or not the data actually support the idea that there are gender effects in wage determination, you could apply some of the methods introduced in this course in order to provide actual evidence on whether or not that's the case. These 3 components of the course are then assessed through a single 3-hour exam at the end of the first year. Students have to answer 4 questions from 12, and they must answer at least 1 on each of the 3 elements of the first year syllabus. Then, if you choose to continue with economics into the 2nd and 3rd year, there are 4 courses on offer in the 2nd year. You have to offer at least 1 of these, and students would normally offer 2 or 3. The courses are a more advanced paper in microeconomics. So this would really add in a lot of detail that you didn't consider in the first year course. You might look at market situations in which one participant in the market is privy to more information than the other side. You might look at instances in which there are differences in risk attitudes across different market participants, instances in which individuals have different time horizons in their decision making, and you'd think about how economic outcomes vary according to these circumstances. There's then a further paper in macroeconomics, which extends the first year work in macroeconomics, and a paper in quantitative economics that introduces you to further tools in statistics for analysing complex economic data sets. There's also a paper, The World Economy Since 1800, which is a paper in economic history, covering economic developments right across the globe. So the rise of the British economy in the 19th century, the rise of the American economy in the 20th century, and so on. There are separate exams for each of these courses, but assessment takes place not at the end of the second year, but actually at the end of the third year. There are no second year exams in PPE. In the third year, there's a wide range of courses representing each of the different fields within economics. Students can choose up to 5 of these, normally 1 or 2, and take the exams for those courses at the end of the third year, along with the exams for the second year courses. For each third year course, there are prerequisites from the second year courses, and the details are given here. So in this lower part of the table, you have the range of optional third year papers. And in order to study, say, public economics in the third year, you must have studied the microeconomics course in the second year. In order to study money and banking in the third year, you must have studied macroeconomics in the second year. So there's a tremendous amount of choice offered by these different papers. If you are particularly interested in the mathematical analysis of economic problems and you wish to progress to a master's degree, you could offer courses such as game theory, econometrics, or microeconomic analysis. These sorts of courses are very much along the lines of what you would see in a master's program in economics. If you prefer to offer papers which are assessed not through mathematical exercises but through essay writing, you can offer papers such as money and banking or the economics of developing countries, which require 3 essays in 3 hours for the exam, which is the classic Oxford format. There's also the possibility of offering coursework assessments. So if you choose to do the paper in behavioral and experimental economics, then there's no exam at all. Instead, you run some economic experiments, either in a lab or online, and then you write up a report on your experiment, and the report is assessed and takes the place of the exam. And of course, there's also the option of writing a thesis in economics, as is also true in philosophy and politics. So as Matt said, once you get beyond the first half of a degree, you can really shape the course so that it fits your own interests, and there are many different directions in which you can take it.
Okay, so thanks, Chris. I think we're done. So we've told you a bit about philosophy, politics and economics in the first year and how the course works then in the second and third years. So we hope that's been helpful. And if you decide to go ahead and apply to Oxford, good luck. Thank you very much.